The incessant drumming of rain against the corrugated iron roof was almost comforting. Almost. In a world gone mad, where the undead roamed, animated by some horrific puppetry of spiders, comfort was a scarce commodity. I huddled deeper into my makeshift sleeping bag, the damp clinging to my bones, a constant reminder of the precariousness of my existence. Project Zomboid had always been a brutal survival simulator, but the spider mod had turned it into a living nightmare. It started subtly. A few extra cobwebs in the corners of houses. A disconcerting skittering you'd dismiss as a rat. Then came the swarms. And finally, the realization that the zombies weren't just rotting corpses, they were exoskeletons, animated by a grotesque, crawling mass of spiders. The image of one collapsing, its shell cracking open to release a torrent of arachnids, was forever burned into my memory. My name is Elias, and I'd been a seasoned Project Zomboid player. I knew how to scavenge, how to build, how to fight. But nothing could have prepared me for this. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a grim determination. I had to survive. The first few days were a blur of frantic looting and desperate escapes. I'd managed to salvage a battered axe, a crowbar, and a backpack overflowing with canned goods and water. My sanctuary was a small, two-story house on the outskirts of Muldroth. It was isolated, relatively structurally sound, and, crucially, had a decent amount of space for defensive modifications. The first task was securing the perimeter. I boarded up the windows with scavenged planks, reinforcing them with furniture barricades. The doors were the weak points. I stacked refrigerators, stoves, anything heavy, against them. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy me time. The spiders, or rather, the spider zombies, were drawn to noise. Gunshots were a death sentence. Melee weapons were the only viable option. The axe was my primary weapon, brutally efficient at cleaving through the rotted flesh and chitin. But it was exhausting work. Food was another constant concern. Canned goods would only last so long. I needed a sustainable source. Gardening was the obvious answer, but that meant venturing into the open, risking encounters with the swarms. Still, it was a risk I had to take. Days turned into weeks. The rhythms of survival became ingrained in my routine. Wake up before dawn, clear the house of any spiders that might have infiltrated overnight. They were always there, lurking in corners, under furniture, scavenge for supplies, reinforce the base, tend to the garden. My garden was a small patch of cultivated land behind the house, surrounded by a makeshift fence of sharpened sticks. It was pathetic, really, but it was producing a meager harvest of tomatoes, potatoes, and cabbage. It was enough to supplement the dwindling supply of canned food. The spiders were relentless. They were everywhere. I'd wake up to find them crawling on the walls, clinging to the ceiling. They seemed to be able to squeeze through the smallest cracks, the smallest openings. I started using fire. A propane torch became my most valued possession. A searing blast of flame was surprisingly effective against the arachnids, incinerating them in an instant. I also started experimenting with traps. Sticky traps crafted from duct tape and cardboard proved surprisingly effective at catching the smaller spiders. Larger ones were more difficult. I tried setting up tripwires connected to cans filled with rocks, but the noise attracted more spider zombies. The isolation was starting to take its toll. I missed human contact, even the chaotic, unpredictable interactions of other survivors. I started talking to myself, rambling aloud about my plans, my fears, my hopes. It helped to maintain a semblance of sanity. One evening, while reinforcing the back door, I heard a strange noise. A rhythmic thumping, different from the erratic gait of the spider zombies. I cautiously peered through a crack in the barricade. It was a man, wielding a crude wooden club, fending off a small group of spider zombies. He was clearly struggling. He was covered in dirt and blood, his clothes torn and ragged. I hesitated. Helping him would expose me to danger. But leaving him to die felt wrong. I grabbed my axe and charged out of the house, screaming a battle cry that echoed through the rain-soaked night. The man looked up, startled. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, with a desperate look in his eyes. Together, we fought off the spider zombies. He was surprisingly skilled with the club, his movements quick and agile. After the last spider zombie fell, we stood there, panting, covered in gore and spider webs. He looked at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thanks," he said, his voice hoarse. I thought I was done for. "I'm Elias," I said, extending my hand. "Ben," he replied, shaking my hand firmly. Ben was a valuable addition to my makeshift fortress. He was strong, resourceful, and, perhaps most importantly, he wasn't insane. We worked together, reinforcing the base, scavenging for supplies, planning for the future. Having someone to talk to, someone to share the burden of survival, was a game changer. We shared stories, strategies, even jokes. The isolation didn't feel so crushing anymore. One day, while exploring a nearby warehouse, we stumbled upon a cache of military supplies. Ammunition, medical supplies, and, most importantly, a working radio. We set it up in the attic of the house, hoping to pick up a signal, any signal. Days went by. Static filled the airwaves. We were about to give up when, one evening, a faint voice crackled through the speaker. "This is Redwood. Calling. Anyone?" Repeat. "Redwood. Calling. Anyone?" Redwood. It was a survivor enclave, located several miles away. They were offering sanctuary, protection, a chance to rebuild. The decision was agonizing. Leaving the base, the haven I had painstakingly built, felt like abandoning everything. But the siren call of hope, the promise of a real community, was too strong to resist. We spent the next few days preparing for the journey. We fortified the house as best we could, leaving traps and supplies for any other survivors who might stumble upon it. Then, under the cover of a stormy night, we set out for Redwood. The journey was fraught with peril. We encountered hordes of spider zombies, navigated treacherous terrain, and narrowly avoided several ambushes. But we made it. We finally reached the gates of Redwood. The sight of the walls, the lights, the other survivors, brought tears to my eyes. We were safe. For now. The fight wasn't over. The spiders were still out there, waiting. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. Maybe, one day, we could reclaim this world from the crawling nightmare. The rain continued to fall, washing away the blood and the grime, a promise of a new beginning.